Hey, we're your hosts.
I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Jonathan.
And we believe that one of the most valuable gifts you can give to yourself is the gift of wholeness through integrating all aspects of what it means to be human.
And in this podcast, we're bringing you insight, information, and inspiration to move from a stressful to stress-free life.
Your journey to becoming even healthier and happier starts right now.
Welcome to Wellness Theory, the podcast.
Welcome to today's show, everyone. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to the one and only Cortney McDermott, who is a best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and mind-body expert with a Master of Science from the London School of Economics. Her work is in the field of self-development and business strategy, has been featured in Inc., Women's Health, Success, The Huffington Post, Fox News, and many other mainstream business and lifestyle media. Cortney's career highlights include her time as an executive at Vanity Fair Corporation, vice president at Sustainability Partners Inc., and then running her own businesses with clients and audiences at Universal Music Group, Google, Nike, and Virgin Unite. Cortney speaks 4 languages and lives between Italy and the US, and today is going to be an amazing episode. Enjoy. So welcome to the show, Cortney. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here.
Listen, from the first moment that we spoke, which actually wasn't too long ago, there's just been this just beautiful connection, I think. And it's been really, really nice to dive into some of your work as well since then. And I'm really excited to bring this conversation to our listeners. So our listeners have just heard a little bit of an intro from you, more from a professional standpoint. But I would love for us to jump straight in with a bit more about you. Who's Cortney behind all of the speaking on stage and the writing the books? Who's Cortney?
Well, first I have to say that I totally felt that spark. And I think that's something that more and more in my life, if I don't feel that spark, I'm not in it, So thank you for being that spark and being that light. And Cortney behind the scenes. That's a big question. I often joke that I've lived so many lifetimes in this life. I've been in all sorts of different roles and all sorts of different places in academia, et cetera. And so it's and then going into my own businesses and creating these books, et cetera. And so it feels like, well, that question is like, where do I come in? But I guess where I would come in is just to say that right now, what I'm experiencing through this form is more just that what you and I were talking about when we first met, which is just that guided sort of intrinsic motivation to more than even to do, because the doing sort of happens through, is more of who we're becoming, who we're supposed to be, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But behind the scenes, I'm just, I guess, relaxing. Actually, I was going to say digging. That's not right. It's more relaxing into that. And it's been pretty extraordinary. So
I love that so much.
The scenes.
I love that so much. So one of the first bits of your work that I dove into before we actually obviously met live on a call was the TED Talk that you did. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting to me. The topic I actually really loved, because you spoke a lot about your, corporate experience in sustainability, but how that really led you to this idea of human sustainability and how are we using our own ability to sustain ourselves. And I absolutely loved the topic, and I love you. But then what was really interesting is then obviously I met you kind of live, and this has been time since the TED Talk, and you look younger, you look healthier, you just seem to be full of vitality. So tell us what's happening there just since that TED Talk until now, because there was already so much wisdom within just that TED Talk to now what you're doing today has evolved drastically. So tell us more about that.
Wow. Well, thank you. This is really funny, actually, because that talk, it's funny. I had the talk about the talk with one of my dear friends afterward. We were talking about the rigor of TEDx, and we were both saying that because, you have to sort of have this speech prepared months in advance, and you have to memorize it, at least by the rules, and you have to stand in the red carpet. And, in my TED Talk, they had these horrible mirrors behind, and they knew it. It was such beautiful theater. I don't know why they did that, but anyway, and the thing is, at that point in my life, frankly, I wasn't very comfortable. I was in full-on transition. So much was changing in my world. I was in the process of separating from my husband, although we hadn't started the separation process, but it was kind of knowing that that was inevitable. And we were married for close to 18 years, or about 18 years. So it was a huge transition. And I was sort of trying to keep it all together while talking about this seed that was in me, which was, okay, we can't pretend that the macrocosm is going to be in a state of health and well-being when the microcosm is in such a state of struggle. And I was seeing all these leaders, me included, who were, jet setting all around the world. And we were doing good work for sure. I mean, I was working within the field of corporate responsibility and sustainability, as well as my responsibilities for head of corporate communications. And I thought, wow, these are people who really genuinely, really do care. Only we're looking at the problem as a means to solve the problem. And we're just not going to get there that way. And so I knew at that point in my life, I was giving that talk, and I was just about to release my first book, Change Starts Within You. And it was about, okay, I'm at this point where, and this was again, before I went full on with a lot of other changes, like, the separation, et cetera. But I was at that point where I said, well, I've got all the gold stars. I've collected all of them, all of the things that society says are to make you a success. I've got them. So what is this? Why am I so unhappy? And rightly to your point, why do I look like it? You're talking about that TEDx talk, but sometimes in some of my speeches around the world, I recently was giving one to 1,000 women, and I showed them a picture of me 10 years ago. And at least half of the audience did not even recognize me. And that was when I was in corporate, and I was inflamed. I looked a lot older. I looked like I was really trying, because I was really trying to fit in. My hair was pin straight, and, all these things. And it's like, and then the part of the audience that recognized it was me, it was just like their mouths were agape. You could hear this collective sigh. And then as more and more people realized just this talk, they couldn't believe that it was the same person. So really, to answer your question of what's happened since then, the answer is my consciousness has completely changed. I mean, we know, right, that we're not the same person walking around as we were 10 years ago. We don't have a single cell in our body that's the same. We're aware of that. There's no molecule in there that says, oh, this was Charlotte 10 years ago, right? So we know that. However, because we are so indebted to a narrative, and we are so inculcated by a collective consciousness as well, an idea of who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do, et cetera, we tend to accumulate that. It's sort of a habit formation and thought formation, which is kind of the same thing. And we become more and more of that form. And that form is just a reflection of your consciousness. So as your consciousness shifts, your form shifts. And sometimes this can happen instantaneously. And I talk about that a little bit in my book, because I've seen what would be considered by most miraculous. And so, that's the difference between me then and me now.
I love that so much. And your book is a really good kind of pathway into that for our listeners that are curious about kind of getting younger and boosting their vitality and enjoying the process as well. So I've dived into your book. And so the book that we're speaking about now is your new book, which is called Give Yourself Permission. And for me, I found this is very much a beautiful cocktail of some of my most favorite personal development books and your twist and your personality in the mix. I absolutely love it. So anybody listening, you'll find out where to get that as we go through this episode. But this is what I want to really dive into you. So first of all, I want to know, what's the reason behind the title of the book, Give Yourself Permission?
Well, the title just came, fully formed, as did the title of all the chapters, because I was in meditation. And by the way, after I wrote my first book and put my first book out, I was like, it's like after you have your first child, you're like, I don't think I'm going to do that again. There's a lot involved. So I didn't think I was going to write a second book, to be quite frank with you. And then all of a sudden I was just as I said, in this deep meditation. It was like, okay, give yourself permission. And all of the chapter outlines came to me as give yourself permission to, and every chapter was permission to do something. And really what it stemmed from, I believe, kind of on a conscious level, as close as I can get to understanding where that input came from, was I had been throughout my career, and also every side of that career, I had seen especially so many women, but a lot of people in general, but especially women, who seem to be unable to give themselves permission. that they were, again, to use the word indebted, which is pretty bizarre because I never use that word and I've used it twice already here today, but very indebted to a, this idea of who they were supposed to be and what was allowed, what is allowed and what's not allowed. And I see this all the time. I see it also in my friends who say like, oh, well, I'm really frustrated in this situation, but there's really not anything I can do. Right. And the one thing you can start to do is start to ease up that sense of, I think it's kind of a collective guilt, around what we can and can't experience and what we can and can't. And by the way, when I say this, there's no part of me that's suggesting that, just do whatever you want and don't care about your neighbor at all. Love everybody and do everything with kindness, but listen to yourself and follow those intuitive hits and those instinctual hits. And so, and the more that I've done this in my own life, where I've given myself permission, the more that evolution that we were talking about has been able to take place. And then I've seen it again with thousands of other people that I've had the chance to work with in the form of audiences, workshops, and I do very, very, very minimal one-on-one, but yeah, I've seen these kind of instantaneous transformations where that light bulb just goes on and you say, whoa, yeah, that's actually the truth.
And it is cool. Exactly that light bulb. And that's that. I really love the title. What I found and what I experienced for sure as well is almost like I was waiting for somebody else to give me permission for a lot of things, right? In different contexts of my life. I think I first come across this idea. It was Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In, her book, where she talks about the tiara syndrome, how we're waiting, typically as women, to wait for somebody else to come and give us this tiara to say, it's okay now, you can go and do whatever the thing is you do. And that was that light bulb. And so this whole idea of giving yourself permission, it's kind of, unfortunately, it's necessary, right? Because we do need to give ourselves permission because society and perhaps upbringings and so forth has, planted a seed of potentially shame for certain things when that's perhaps been unnecessary also. But we then wait for somebody else to give us permission, but we have that ability and power and right to give ourselves permission to do anything. So I really love the title. I love where that's come from.
Thank you. And one of the things that's also really cool about when you give yourself permission is that the people around you give themselves permission too. And I see this with everything. So one example that I really love is sometimes, my daughter and I will be traveling, we'll be in the airport and I'll just start stretching, like, and moving my body in ways that I need to move my body. I'm just listening to my body and my body saying, move in this way. Right. And so I have learned after years of suppressing that, and by the way, the word shame is really apropos. I'm glad you brought that in. Before when I was saying guilt, shame is like the next level of that. And there's so many of us entrenched in that. So, and it's a very, it's the kind of energy that doesn't allow you to move forward in a lot of different regards. So, but anyway, when I'm in the airport, I give myself permission to just move, or even in the airplane. And my mom or my daughter is always, Mom, please don't do that. Don't, right? And she's like covering her eyes and pretending like she's not with me and all sorts of things. But the cool thing is that I've noticed multiple times that when I do that, other people start to stretch and they start to move around and they start to do things that probably otherwise, I'm not saying that they're doing it only because I'm doing it, but it's the reminder and the activation of those mirror neurons and the knowing that you don't actually have to sit stock still. And in fact, and you talk about this a lot in your work with Jonathan, is like, you don't have to be this robot, basically. I mean, I don't know if you use those terms, but when you guys were talking about also engaging the side of physiology, et cetera, to really have those state shifts, I mean, that's crucial. So yeah, I'm glad you like that part.
It's funny you say about moving around at airports or like on the plane and things, because we're exactly the same. Me and Jonathan travel. It's like we'll have like our foam rollers out. We'll be doing all sorts of things. And yeah, there's some people looking at you like you're, but then there's other people that are like, oh, what are you doing? Can I use it? Like, and you end up connecting also. But it's given like a new meaning to an everyday experience that could be different for somebody next time as well. And it's so powerful. I think we don't always recognize, I certainly don't, like the influence that we can have. And I think it's really important that we own it. So not only give ourselves permission to show up in the way that we believe that we ought to, or that we believe that we are, and then actually really owning that. I think that's just another level. Right. So Cortney, so part of your book It's like one of the very first things that I read, and I'm going to read it now because I really liked where it came from, and I think it's important for our listeners to hear. So basically, you literally just said, this book is not about getting somewhere because you're already there. It's not about becoming someone because you are that someone. It's not about having or doing, because the having and doing will happen through you once you awaken to the truth of who and what you are. And I think that really is like the essence of like your whole book, but it's so on point as to how I feel about personal development and our spiritual growth. It's very much about realizing that actually there's not this destination that we need to keep like striving towards, like this is it. Like we are here with the you is already there. It's just sometimes we mask it with other things. So I'd love to just get your thoughts on that. Like how would you perhaps describe that little statement or little phrase to our listeners if they're perhaps thinking, what do you mean having or doing, isn't perhaps the thing that I need to be focused on, and is more of the truth of who I am I need to be focusing on, because that in itself is a lot for somebody to take in.
Right, exactly. It kind of flies contrary to everything that, or most of the things that are out there. One of the things that I consistently say to people when they come to me, and it doesn't matter if they're a Fortune 500 executive or whomever it might be, right? One of the things I say is, I don't have your answers, but you do. And it's really learning to listen, and that sort of deep listening, which can often, I think sometimes we think of it as, again, like we're trying to get somewhere. Even if you look at quote unquote practices like meditation, I mean, meditation at its basic kind of fundamental essence is just you really kind of dancing with all that is. You're not trying, Alan Watts put it beautifully when he was talking about, when you dance, you're not thinking about where you're going to end up on the dance floor. You're just enjoying the dance. Silence is like that. And that, and again, a lot of our spiritual traditions and spiritual masters have pointed to that. They've pointed to that as sort of this gateway into your infinite potentials, really. Because that's the other thing. We think, most of us, again, we're so conditioned, we're hyper conditioned to believe that this is what's possible for us, right? I'm Pipo Papo. I live on Via Cariol, and my best friend's name is Sam, and whatever it is, right? And that's my picture. That's what I am. That's again a snapshot of where your consciousness is right now and the potentials you believe to be available to you. But what we know, and this is not just demonstrated from our spiritual traditions, but our science has caught up a lot over the last couple 100 years, and especially the last 100 years, which is you truly do have infinite potentialities available to you. So what are you choosing in any given moment? Where are you choosing to put your attention, et cetera? So going back to those lines, really what it's about is, it's so simple. It's elusive. So trying to talk about it is a little bit like, when I don't remember where this comes from, but this idea of, you're pointing at the moon, but if someone's looking at your finger and they're thinking that's the moon, right? They've sort of missed the mark, right? And so with these words, it's, you're pointing at something, but the experience and the experiential knowing of the magnitude of who and what you are is so astounding that truly you would be wordless. There's no way to really describe it. However, there's no getting there. And this is the conundrum. Because if we think that what we're doing, et cetera, is to kind of reveal this to us, in a sense, there is a lot of truth to seek and ye shall find. And there's even a lot of science behind that if we look at the reticular activating system in your mind, et cetera. However, the simple fact of it is it's right there. And, lots of times when they say it's right, it's staring you in the face. So it's the one thing you can't see, right? And I believe that lots of times when we simply remove some of those distractions and we simply just get quiet and kind of groove with it all, then this becomes apparent and more so. And then it just takes over your life.
Yeah. It's a really tricky one to talk about, like you said, because there are really no words. It's an experience to be felt. right? It's it's a consciousness to be felt, not an experience per se. And for somebody listening to this, because bearing in mind our podcast is called Stress Relief in Your Pocket, so a lot of our listeners, they are passionate about being vitally well and being healthy, but perhaps there's some real commitment to stress management in their life right now, whether that be anxiety, overwhelm, just sheer busyness and chaos of life. And you can listen to us talking like this and it can sound a bit woo-woo, right, for some people listening. So it's almost like a little bit of a bridge that needs to kind of be built for our listeners, perhaps, in how do we move from this place that we're in where we really do identify with where we are, like our name and our neighbors in our job, and we really start to like, we're in it, it's very hard sometimes to then be able to even entertain the idea that we are this infinite possibility that is just this beautiful ball of energy walking around that can just influence anything without you even really trying. Like it just seems like such a jump. So what would your kind of like words be to somebody that might be in that place right now?
Yeah, I love the fact that you're bringing this up, because both your story, my story, Jonathan's story, I mean, it's all reflective of what you're talking about. If we went on a journey, right? And we did start from that place of, oh, wow, I do have all the things, and I'm very overwhelmed, and this can't be the way, because I just feel stressed and tired and worn out and all the things. And I was on a podcast recently where the podcast host was just saying, you're the perfect bridge, because you were a corporate executive and you were at a Fortune 500 and you were doing all these things and jet setting around, et cetera. And now you've completely reinvented your life. And so lots of times, yeah, it's easy to go straight to, wow, there's all this, there's this field. This was so beautiful. And Rumi was talking about beyond right doing and wrong doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. Right. And so when you're sort of playing in this 0 point field, lots of times you do forget that, wow, there was a lot that went in to traversing those oceans of turmoil, I would even say, like, into a point where then you sort of have to dive deep. And it's funny because the surface of the ocean might seem really tumultuous, but when you go down, it's like, whoa, there's so much calm and steadiness here. But yes, you're right, there is a part where we are swimming and we are efforting, and I talk about this a lot in the book, because there is that, again, seek and ye shall find. So you're efforting until the efforting no longer becomes necessary. And to anyone who's in that space, again, one of the reasons why I say, I don't have your answers, et cetera, is because we oftentimes are inundated with the 5 ways to do this and the 4 ways to do that. And if you just do these 3 things, then everything in your life is going to be okay. And I don't subscribe to that. I do believe that, just like Dorothy, you're wearing the red slippers and you have the way home. And I also believe, though, that certain podcasts like yours, et cetera, can remind you of that. And if you're listening and there's sparks going off, it means, oh, wow, yeah, I know, I get it. I get that truth. So first of all, pay attention to that if it's in resonance. If it's not in resonance, ditch it. I don't care what it is, ditch it, because it's not in the right frequency right now for wherever that is. However, if it's in resonance, there are definitely some things that I personally have done. And again, I talk about a lot of these there in that second book and even in the first book. But for me, one of the biggest things, and you and Jonathan talk about it as well in your work, is movement. And so it's funny because lots of times we think things are psychological when really it's just stuck stagnant energy in our bodies, in our physical bodies. And so I often recommend to people, for example, the simple practice of shaking. That was revolutionary for me when I found it. I found it in this work called Koya, and Rochelle, the founder of Koya, she told this beautiful story. And she had people, and you might even, if you're listening, do this. She had people shake one hand while keeping the other one stagnant. So they just kept shaking very vigorously one hand while she was telling the story of a gazelle who gets chased through the wetlands by a tiger and just shake really hard, like harder than you normally would. However, the gazelle gets away, but the gazelle does not go to therapy for the next 10 years. About the time that this tiger was chasing her through the wetlands, what the gazelle does is she shakes through every part of her body, releasing the tension, releasing the fear, and goes back to being a gazelle. Now, if you hold those 2 hands out in front of you, you'll feel the difference. When you stop the shaking, you'll feel the difference of that hand that was shaking and the hand that wasn't. What do you feel, for example?
I feel like the hand that was shaking is just sort of, it's settling. It's like just feeling very like there's the subtle sensations that are just like finding their place, almost like dissolving and finding their way. And the other hand is just like stagnant to a sense.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. So now let's shake out the other one just to kind of balance those, harmonize a little bit here. And that when she told me that story, and then I started to shake through my whole body, which, by the way, at that time, there were parts of my body I couldn't shake. That's how much tension I was holding in my physical body without even being aware of it. And now I can shake everything, and I love to shake everything. And I'll often do this especially if I feel like something has been off-putting or something like that, I just shake through every part of my body, release the tension, release the fear. And I go back to being what it is I'm being, in any given moment. So I think that practice is really powerful. And there are a number of practices like that can start to out of the multiplex of the mind that's telling you that you're one thing and you're not one thing and you're not the other, and really get you back into that awareness and that knowing that does live in your physical body. There's a lot in that as well around. I mean, I'm a huge fan of kinesiology and stuff like that, just to really check in with your body. I do that often. But I also want to bring this back again for whoever is struggling with the whole, like, oh, is this woo woo or is this science? When we talk about stuff like this, for example, the shaking is a great example of what are we actually doing? Okay, because I talk about stuck, stagnant, energy, but let's look at what we're really doing if we look at it from a scientific perspective. Okay, so you have a thought, right? And most of us are having anywhere between 50,000 to 70,000 thoughts per day on average. Okay, and you meaning we, right? We will maybe attach to a thought. Right. And lots of times we're in these thought loops, and those thought loops are really kind of defining us. But again, we talk about thought. We don't even know the origin of thought. So with all the advancements we've made, we don't know. There's not a part of your brain that I can point to, like the prefrontal cortex, and say, okay, thought originates there. I don't know where that thought impulse came. All I know is it's an electrical impulse that came in. And instead of most of us sort of watching it the way we would a wave, because you don't look at waves and say, oh, that was a good wave. That wave behaved. That was a great wave. And then I'll let that wave go. And then the next wave, oh, that was a terrible wave. And I really sincerely hope there are never any waves like that again. You just marvel at this life at force that's coming at you, right? And that's actually a huge key right there. But anyway, we get this thought impulse, which again, we are not really entirely responsible for. But when we start to hold on to it, either in the form of, I want to keep this, like a golem, this is my treasure, right? Or I won't let this, I'm resisting this is awful, right? What happens is we start to create a lot of energy, but we also start to around it. It's almost like a ball forming around it, right? And it sends these chemical messengers down into our body, also called neuropeptides, right? They get lodged into different organs. And then we wonder, why do I have problems with my gut? Why do I have problems? What this thing I'm feeling in my heart, I have a heaviness in my heart, et cetera. This is, if you look at brain body scans, is actually absolutely astounding, because you will see a correspondence between the type of thought and where it goes actually to be lodged in your body. And your organs are kind of like these beautiful sponges that just take it in, right? So when we do something like shaking, it's an example of something that is the farthest thing from woo-woo, because we are quite literally releasing some of those neuropeptides so that we can restore the health and the homeostasis of the body, right? So those are some examples, but you will have noticed yourself, and anyone listening, I mean, those times when you're struggling with something and you go for a walk and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's not that big a deal, or I figured it out, or I've got the solution, right? And it's just literally you moved the energy around. So it's one example. I mean, I could cite many, but I don't want to, keep us on the track if it's not where you want to stay.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's always good to have like practical examples, and something as simple as shaking, and you can do right now. I literally just did like the example that you gave, and you can really feel the difference. And I think sometimes it takes that for us to almost be convinced. As human beings, we like to have a bit of evidence for things, and I'm like that. I know Jonathan's like that, but now Jonathan, actually, he's always shaking. He's always bouncing around somewhere. Like the first thing he does in the morning, the last thing he does at night is bouncing on the spot, shaking, just letting things in and out. And it just really resonated with him deeply. And it's resonated with me, probably not in the exact same way. Like I don't do it as devoted as he does. But I just come back from, it's the second time doing a 10-day silent meditation. They call it a retreat, but retreat has got the wrong, I think, connotation attached to it now. It was a retreat, but not in the let's go and relax kind of sense that's out there now in the tourist world. More of a retreat if you're going inward, right? And it was the Vipassana meditation, which in a very, very, very superficial, simplified description is effectively a body scan. And you basically spend 10 days just observing your body and all the sensations in it. It's extremely powerful. And the first time I did that was years ago now, but it was the first time I really could feel the level of sensation and the connection with my body and my organs and all of those those past experiences that have contributed to things, those emotions, the thoughts, and I could really, really understand it and get it, but I didn't get it until I felt it. So anyone listening to this, you don't have to go and do 10 days like silent meditation to achieve that. You can literally just practice the shaking here, like you just shared there, Courtney, because like it just takes a little bit of, okay, let me give it a try. Let's have some fun. Let's entertain these crazy two people that are here having this conversation podcast. You know, let's just playful on and have a go. And you'll notice it. You can't deny then the changes you experience, right?
Yeah. And I think science is a great doorway, gateway. And there are many, right? Whatever one, and you brought up the right word again, resonance, if when you hear it, something about it triggers something in you, that's that indication that might be something that, again, is one of the infinite doorways into the truth of who you are. And so, yeah, it could be that you want to go on on a big retreat or a Vipassana or whatever that looks like. And it could be that you're just going to dedicate a few minutes to sitting in silence. It was Pascal. I love this quote by Pascal, the mathematician and philosopher, who said that all men's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And I think if we spent a little more time with ourselves, which is the scariest thing in the world sometimes, because it's a lot of work. And even, I talk a lot about learning how to think. I talk a lot about that in the book too. I mean, that's a massive endeavor. Most of us really don't direct our thoughts.
Yep.
So, embarking on something like that is a big deal. And at the same time, there is spontaneous awakening available. But I think it is really important that if science is resonant with you, it was for sure for me. I mean, I was a corporate executive. I had all the educational background, et cetera, and all of those kinds of things that said, if there's not, like you said earlier, proof in the pudding, and I don't want to eat the stuff, However, I was seeing these examples of things that were somewhat miraculous occurring within me and within my own psyche. And I said, okay, wait a second. And I had always been a student of human potential and human development, but I really deepened into that because I was like, how is this happening? What is happening? And so dove deep into the neuroscience, into epigenetics, into quantum physics from a theoretical standpoint, those kinds of things to understand what is, what's behind this veil. I really wanted to know. And so I think if that's where, you're coming from, it's an excellent way to start to find yourself.
Yeah, I think the way you've written your book as well, you can see it draws upon all of your expertise and all of the, studies that you've done and your own like professional experience as well as academic. But the way you write in the book is very relatable, which I think is really, really beneficial to the reader. And, there's so many topics in there. We'd be here all day if I went through all of them. But there was a few for me that really stood out that I think I would love to maybe highlight or jump into here today. One of them sounds really simple, but it's this permission to have fun. I still today have to give myself permission to have fun. And I really try hard. I think that's kind of part of what the problem was, is always I tried to have fun rather than just have fun. And it was more of a learning how to have a playful attitude in all of my endeavors, like whatever it is I'm doing that day. And it's still a work in progress. But tell me about why that's so important to be in your book.
Yeah. First, I want to call out the fact that this book is a relatively short read, but you're right. There's a lot packed in, and so you could read it in a few hours, or you could read it in a few years, going back to certain chapters. And I think that's actually sometimes the best way is where am I still struggling? So I love the fact that you're bringing up fun, because for me, that was the biggest one. That was the biggest one. That was the big kahuna. That was the mothership for me as well. I was like, I just take myself, I was taking myself too seriously. And, in a sense, it's great because the efforting, and I talk about this when I talk about having fun and the experiences that I've had, because I've had some real trips without plant medicine and stuff like that, where I have been just in a totally different dimension, and realizing, wow, like there's this all this sense of just heaviness and responsibility and seriousness and stuff. It just disappears and melts into something else. However, for me personally, and I think for a lot of us, and probably a lot of your listeners, there was an efforting before that. There was a lot of efforting. And when it was funny, pretty comical, and this has happened to me multiple times. I have so many stories. I even have a story. I noticed you guys have some connection with Mind Valley. I was speaking at Mind Valley University last year, and I even have a connection with that, another story, maybe for another time. But many times this has happened to me where I've really been kind of heavily invested in achieving an outcome. And it was at the moment that I let go of my attachment to that outcome, and I got a little goofy. Like I really got goofy, and boom, I mean, full on rocket experiences into what's possible. So I believe that play, and you can't, to your point, you can't force your way in. There's a in the Bible, I can't recall exactly because it was years ago when I read this, but is like you can break into the wedding party, but you can't stay, right? If you don't, there's like, so it's like you can't even if you kind of accidentally get in, it's like you can't really stay there unless, again, instead of that sort of, we're not trying to get through the mind, or maybe at first efforting through the mind, having that cognitive understanding, that cognitive awareness that then sort of, I want to say explodes because I'm thinking of a firework, but it's like it fireworks into this experiential knowing that this whole darn thing is play.
Yeah.
The whole thing. The whole darn thing. I mean, and that's the ultimate kind of 0 point field of this experience that we're living, is the whole darn thing is a play.
Yeah. I hear that. I'm definitely resonating with that 100%. And it's that difference between just playing as I want to say like normal human, if that makes sense. Like as in like, so for me, like there's this bridge, right, between like when I'm very much A-type. I'm aiming towards something. I know exactly what I need to do and I will do it. But at the same time, I can easily stop having fun along the way. So one of the things that I used to do to almost like practice flexing my play muscle was to do the things I enjoy doing, right? Which sounds quite simple. So for me, it would be anything that can make me laugh. So anything comedy related, I absolutely love it. And painting. They're two of my like gateways into playfulness that can get me there like really, really fast. However, like I don't need those gateways anymore. So when I say like a normal person, like for me, like the normality was like almost like scheduling it in to make sure that like I had some sense of balance in my life. Like for me, that is kind of the normal where I think a lot of people are at, particularly in this region where we are. It's like work all week, and then the weekend you can go and have fun. It's like it's very much scheduled kind of thing. But now it is that realization. I'm not sure which point this happened. I think it's just happened gradually over time. I've realized that it is all just play, all of it, everything. This podcast, the people that I speak to, even though we do serious work, it is all still just this illusion of creation that we're all just like partaking in. And actually, when we look at it that way, everything just feels so much lighter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, 100%. And not only that, but you realize, you're awake in the dream at that point, and you dance around the stage, instead of donning this costume and saying, this is my role, and believing that you're the role. Right. And I could go on and on about this because I have a lot of feelings about it. Today I was actually out walking, and I had this just I don't even know how to describe it, but it was this idea came in. It was, that, you know, when you go to the theater and you see a really magnificent play, and at the end of the play, all of the characters are bowing and they're smiling and they're proud. They've done a really, it's been an excellent performance and everyone's clapping and super excited. Now, that point at the very end, that's the point that you can be in the whole time, you know, knowing that you're not the character, and even you are the character and the audience and the director and the stage and the seats and the whole shebang, right? And so when you go into it, and this is what I really enjoy about and I've only really been on the surface, but still the surface is quite deep of quantum theory, which is really like shattering the illusion of separation. Yep. You know, I mean, it just shatters the illusion of separation. But again, you can have that cognitive understanding, which for a long time I did, and I was trying to force my way in to the wedding party. Yep. And then the moment that fireworks into this experiential knowing of like, this is self talking to self, trying to understand self, that's a trip. That's thing, you know, that's real fun. And then you just relax, and then you just see what comes through when you're relaxed. And it's as simple as that. However, you know, as Da Vinci put it, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, right? And so there is a toiling, I believe, to becoming it. It's like I bring you a tulip seed or a bulb, and you can't tell that there's a tulip in there. I mean, there's really and it's got to toil its way out, right? And you've got to provide it with a lot of nutrients in order for it to sprout, and I don't know if sprout's the correct, but anyway, you know what I mean, come up and come into flower. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at this little heart here that I have, and you do that, and it does it, and it does that work, and you see even that guardianship. Again, we have that guardianship inherent within us and all around us of, I'm going to nurture you, even in ways that you don't understand. I don't know if that bulb likes to have water thrown all over it. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know. But what I do know is sometimes I don't like the stuff that gets thrown over me. And then I have to say, well, yeah, I guess that's part of whatever's turning me into who I'm becoming now, and how I'm blossoming into more and more of this expression, and the way the formless wants to express itself through this form. And I believe that's really ultimately kind of the game we're all, you know, that this intelligence, which is one intelligence, is at, you know. And recently it's quite amusing what came through, because it was the word amusing. This woman was asking me in an interview, she said, well, why are we still at it? You know, because I was talking about these infinite games that we play. And she said, well, why are we still at it? And I said, because we still find it amusing, you know.
But it is an infinite game though, right? How can we not be playing it?
I think there, you know, here's what I believe about that is the only inevitable is the change of form, right? Change. The only constant is change, as they say, right? And we're constantly changing form, right? And the intelligence, it's one intelligence, is constantly changing form. So right now, what we're looking at is a population of about 8 billion, you know, et cetera, here. And we've got all these other elements to that, to nature, right? Because we're part of that as well. And so it's like, well, how is that going to change and evolve? And that, again, is always a question of consciousness. So as the consciousness changes, the form changes. And so that's really becomes like, yeah, we're going to probably keep playing these games, but obviously it's all going to be, you know, radically different, especially as more and more people come into this deep awareness and knowing.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And it's interesting. That follows in nicely to the next part of the book that I want to mention to you, which is because, you know, we are evolving. I think, you know, as a species, if you like, we are definitely awakening more. I think humanity is moving in a positive direction. I think I'm an optimist, because there's a lot out there obviously to say the opposite. But, you know, there's great news out there. Is like the ozone layer is healing itself and things like that. So people are waking up to this stuff to really be able to make a difference from like a day-to-day in our actual human experience. And one of the things you talk about in your book is this idea of opting out. And you talk about the idea of JOMO, which is the joy of missing out. And obviously, we're all very aware of FOMO, the fear of missing out, which is a very real experience for a lot of people. I really love where you then take it from essentially moving from FOMO to JOMO, really. And I would love for you to just share your take on that, because I think if we're going to continue to raise our consciousness, we have to opt out of some of these games, some of these illusions. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. You have to pay real close attention to what is fueling your light and what is depleting your light. And I'll use the word light. You could use the word fire. You can use the word enthusiasm. You could use the word excitement. I think excitement's a really good one, for example. If you're listening to something and you feel the activation of your cells, you feel excited, you feel enthusiastic, you feel like you could climb Everest or wherever else you want to climb, right? It might be the hill by your house. You feel that excitement. That's it right there. There's no more, there's no other game in town. You follow that. And that, by the way, is that force source energy that's coursing through you, that is constantly inviting you through your exposure to things to either step more into this excitement, this joy, or to notice the things that are not in alignment, not in harmony with that. And so I think it's actually, the litmus test is really simple. It's like, it's lighting me up, it's not lighting me up. This person, the situation, the circumstance, whatever it looks like. And I've gotten very whimsical in these later years. So, I mean, not that I'm in later years, but I've gotten very whimsical at this point where I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do that. No, I won't do that. And I don't really have much of a, rational explanation, so much as I'll just feel, yeah, that's it there, that's lighting me up. And I think the more pay attention to that and really pay attention to that. So for example, some people may get all lit up on social media. I don't know. I'm not one of those people. I actually have someone mostly who manages. I check in on Instagram here and there because I really like it. I like to see people's pictures and things they send me. But it's not like I won't spend, and I'm very mindful about how I use these technologies. And I've worked with, people who work in these fields, and I know what's kind of behind it and the billions of dollars that get invested for the most precious resource we have. And that resource is our attention. Again, companies are paying trillions for your attention. So one of the things I say in the book is, we're not paying attention to our attention. Where's your attention?
Yeah.
And if you really start to notice where your attention is, you'll start to notice those things that are lighting you up or not lighting you up, that are exciting you or not exciting you. And then based on that, you make certain decisions. And again, knowing that there's so much invested in keeping you kind of distracted, there are some tougher decisions sometimes that need to be made, but they don't need to be made all at once. We can gently sort of soothe ourselves into this place. But what happens is really beautiful, because the more you start to understand, see, and become aware of this, the more you create that space, the more space that then gets created. And all of a sudden you're just like, oh, wow, I get to play. Going back to the previous point, I get to play. I don't have to run around and sort of be consumed by other people's priorities, which, if you think about it, I mean, that is a great definition of social media or email, is just other people's priorities for the most part. And then you will find some things that truly are resonant and truly are reminding you of your own power and your own potential. And those merit some attention.
Yeah, I'm a true believer in it. It's when we can almost free ourselves from distraction, we create a space. And within that space is when we can enjoy these moments, right? Literally moment to moment. I think it takes a real layer of confidence to say no and push back to a lot of distraction, whether that's social media, whether that's a certain friendship group or a work project. Like, it takes a lot of confidence to do that. So what is the role that confidence plays in your eyes?
Super happy you're bringing this up, because confidence is one of my favorite discussions. I think a lot of times people get confidence gets a bad rap, because we tend to think a person who's confident is, the one who's going to be speaking the most and the loudest and sort of able to do all these things that other people might be able to, et cetera. Confidence has nothing at all to do with that. Nothing. Confidence comes from confidere, with trust. It means with reliance. It means you have that trust. And I talk about this a lot in my work, because we have that trust for virtually everything that's occurring within us and outside of us. We have to have it for our survival. So we trust inherently. We trust that our heart's going to continue to beat. We trust that our brains are going to continue to send electrical impulses down to our legs, having us take one step after another. We trust that all of our vital organs are going to continue to do business as usual, including the trillions of biochemical reactions occurring in our body every second. We're not sitting there saying, are you doing things right down there? Let me just make sure, and let me get on top of it. Let me create a 5-year plan for that. We're not doing that, right? In the same way, we're not doing it with what's occurring externally to us, right? You don't sit and I often joke, you don't go to bed at night thinking, is the sun going to come up tomorrow? Is it not going to come up? Is it going to come up? Is it not going to come up? You would never fret about it unless, of course, maybe you have some psychoses, but otherwise, and with all blessing and all due respect for that, but it's like, for the most part, if you're, functioning, even under anxiety, et cetera, those are not the things that you're worried about. What we do lots of times is we take the leftover 0.0000 whatever 1% that for some reason we've convinced ourselves we must control.
Yeah.
I must control this person. I must control this relationship. I must control how the thing goes in the business. I have to create a 5-year plan. I have to stick to it. Now, I did this for quite a while, and God bless, I did, and I achieved great results with that. But I achieved far greater results. In fact, I write about it, I think, in the second book of, when I finally let the know. And one of the first things I did was I took an old piece of cardboard. I think it just on the side of a box, I cut out a square of cardboard and I drew 12 boxes, and I put these really audacious goals. I had no idea how I was going to do any of it. I was going to publish my first book, and I was going to give my first TEDx talk and all these things. And I just put them in there. And then I just got out of the way, Charlotte. I just got out of the way. And the circumstances that align, if I were to tell you, and we don't probably have the time for that on this podcast, maybe a future one, if I were to tell you the circumstances that aligned to bring all of those to fruition within the exact month that I put them, that I had absolutely no idea how I was going to do any of it, it's astounding. It's truly astounding. And the more I have said, look, if I can trust that this force is going to take care of everything else, maybe, just maybe, I can extend that trust to everything else. And I can put out that desire, which anyway is just an evolutionary impulse coursing through me, and understanding the difference too between your desires. I talk about that as well in the book, but understanding that and really saying, look, this is an evolutionary impulse. If it's an evolutionary impulse, it's just like the tulip in the bulb. Okay. So it's really a question of nurturing that, in the ways that come to you. And again, this harkens back to at the very beginning of our conversation when you were talking about the intro and how the doing happens through you. It happens through you as a result of who you are, who you believe yourself and know yourself now to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I spoke about this on the podcast before around the idea of the word become. We have to be first, and then it comes, whatever it is, right? It's like when we really lean into who it is we are being, and when we're in resonance with our truth, everything plays out as it needs to. But it can be really tricky to have that level of trust, I think, for a lot of people, and it has been for me on my journey, is to be able to really just let go and get out of my own way for everything. I've been able to do it with small things, and then it gets bigger over the years, and it's definitely improving, but it's definitely still a work in progress. And I think one of the things for me that I realized is that was blocking me from trusting fully was a lack of safety. Right, it was essentially looking for security. There was my ego flipping out because there was so much fear present. For again, we can talk about this in any context of life, but then that when I started to essentially get to know my ego and understand that, and understand, okay, what is that fear, and allow myself to feel those fears and understand them, and to raise my own awareness in that, I was then able to trust more, and trust that actually me and my ego are on the same team. We're on the same side, right? And that then built my confidence more and more, and then has allowed me to trust more and more. But it's been a heck of a journey. So I guess my question to you is, if anyone's listening to this and they're like, okay, they get that they can trust that their heart's still beating and it will be tomorrow, and that the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and their body's going to digest their food for the next meal they have, and they fully trust that, but yet they can't trust that a project that they're working on is going to work it out in the way that they want to. There's like this real contrast in that. How does somebody build that level of trust where they can just get out of their own way and surrender fully?
Okay, so wow, that's such a beautiful question. There's so much to unpack, because I want to kind of go back to the beginning of it with the ego. First, I'm just really glad that you are talking about the ego in a friendly way, because lots of times people get the ego gets such a bad rap. I'm like, ego is the lowercase self, right? It is literally the character that is in support of your of the formless, right? When you let it be. So first, one of the things is really and I'm going to come right back to that point, because the first thing is we've got to allow ourselves to just relax a little bit. And that is the hardest thing in the world. I used to get so upset. Like if someone would tell me to relax when I was anxious, I'd be like, oh my God,
I'd be like, I am relaxed in the least
exactly. I am relaxed, obviously, right? Exactly. So I hear it, like I feel you, and I felt me in that moment, and I get it, because there's an unraveling that happens, and it happens mostly, I believe, through grace. You know, you call on this thing called grace, and you call on that formless energy. You call on that force source energy. You say like, I need help right now. Just, it could be to yourself outside when you're walking in the woods, a little out loud, whatever. I mean, just you call and you say, I need help. Like I'm trapped in the multiplex of the mind right now. Right. But I actually would love for the ego to be in service as it's destined to this force source energy. And so you call on that assistance. And that is the one thing I will say will never let you down. It's never going to just not show up in some form or another. It is always going to show up, and sort of just in the same way that it is, you know, beating your heart, it will show up. But lots of times we have to ask. We have to relax and ask. And again, I know that it can seem very deeply frustrating sometimes to be like, well, how do I relax? And the closest I can come to explaining it is we just, you could even do this physically, where you just let go, you know, you just open your hands and you just say, and you just ask for that help. And you say like, hey, I'm in a real twirl around this, you know, just I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Because that's the truth of it. We don't know what to do. We really don't know what to do about anything. That's the real truth. I don't know. I'll get insights, I'll get intuitive hits, which I listen to and I follow. And I never know where they're going to end up. And they always end up in these really magical places. But I didn't used to do that. I used to say, okay, well, all right, if this is the thing that I want, then these are the, 100 steps to get there. And I'm going to toil and I'm going to make my way there and all this stuff. But there is a much faster way. And it does come through this notion of just easing into it. There's a beautiful concept in the Taoist traditions. It's I've heard it described with different words, wu wei or wei wu wei, but the idea is it's no forcing, no forcing in anything you do. So the minute you start to notice, oh, I'm sort of forcing or manipulating, you call on that and you say like, oh wow, I'm doing that again. Could you help me out here? I need some help. How do I let go? There's no forcing of it. And that's the sort of really funny, paradox behind the whole thing, because like you're trying to get somewhere and but the minute you stop trying, you're there. It's a divine paradox.
It is. And that's it's funny, right? When you really start to think about it and
hilarious
to like relate to it, you start to realize that even if I think I do know, I don't know. Like that is just an illusion of control, right? So even if I've got 100 steps, there is no reason to say that is actually going to work, because there's so many divine interventions that can happen along the way, that can change everything. And who are we to say that that's not how it's supposed to be?
Exactly. And then you start to really watch everything with this sense of mystery and wonder that is just like when you were a kid, and it reminds me again of the Bible, because there's a line in the Bible that says, unless you become again as children, you will not inherit the kingdom. And I study many spiritual traditions. I'm really enamored with a lot of the teachings in a lot of different traditions, but that one in particular, really reminds me, like, okay, we go back to that essence. We go back to when we were children, and we were all born with it. If you watch a child, they're just wondering in the real sense, like to wonder at everything. I mean, if you sat and actually looked at anything, it could be the desk. I mean, I'm sitting at this gorgeous wood desk. I mean, if I studied the wood for an hour, I couldn't get bored if I wanted to, if I was really, really looking at it and seeing it. Same thing, if I'm looking at a butterfly, if I'm looking at your face,
It's
if I look at your eyes, if I look into your eyes, I could just lose myself, you know? And that's really kind of where it's at. I mean, when you just get with it, you just get with all of it, and we stop that, that sort of insane, which is the perfect word, insano, malsano, unhealthy, attempt at controlling any of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible, because like there's a part of me that wants to control things, but
Of
there's like this,
course.
right, and that's the game. That's kind of the
Yeah.
fun of it. There's a book that really helped me with this idea of surrender and trust. Is The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. If anyone's
Genius,
listening,
that dude.
go
Yeah.
and read all of his books, but particularly listen to that book in relation to what we've been speaking about today, because it's just it's a true, like, it's his true story of how when he surrendered, the way his life unfolded. And it just, I think that for me was just a bit more proof for
Yeah.
that part of my mind that needed it, to then let go that little bit more, and that little bit more, and that little bit more. And it's I think the more we can hear conversations like this, the more we can hear when other people have leaned in and had that trust, there becomes more safety, right, as well, which therefore it takes off some of that extra pressure that we put on to things ourselves to try and control.
Right.
Courtney,
Yeah.
there's so much that I could speak to you about today, but I'm really mindful of your time. So there's one thing that's I do want to read here, actually, that you wrote about in your book, and this was towards the end, and it's really, really in alignment to our vision here at Wellness Theory, but me personally and how I kind of see the world. And it's when you said that this comes from Elizabeth Browning, calls the imprisoned splendor. So as your presence will be the fulcrum, your shared gifts will be the lever, and you will move the world. Like, that literally gave me goosebumps when I read it, because I haven't heard that before. And it just really brought home to me, again, that ripple effect. If we can just be here now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's actually Archimedes, right? And it's Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to put it, I will move the world. And I cited that early in the book, and I come back with the reminder that you are, everything that is required for you is that lever, and everything that you are, the support beams that you're putting it on through this work is that fulcrum, and you can truly move the world. And that, it's a very powerful sentiment and a very true one.
And all of your work within the book, but outside of the book as well, is clearly a testament to that as well, that you believe that, you're living it, and you're serving as a role model for others to be able to kind of walk in that path as well. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And listen, in the book, for our listeners, there's so much there for you. There's so much. Obviously, we've touched on like a small few kind of key points, I would say, from the book, but there's so much in there, in and around the mind. You speak about wealth. There's so many exercises in the book as well that people can go away and do. So is there anything else, Cortney, that you feel like we need to add to this conversation that we haven't spoken about already, just for this episode? I think we need to get you back for another one for sure at some point.
No, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much to you and Jonathan for doing the work that you do. Thank you to the listeners, because if you made it through this podcast, it's testament to where you're going and where you're heading. And my hats, literal and figurative, are off to you. And I love you. I love what you're doing, and I'm super, super grateful to have been here today and share this moment with all of you, and you especially, Charlotte. You're a light. So keep shining. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cortney. For our listeners, all of Cortney's details will be obviously in the show notes, and you can obviously go and find her on the respective social media platforms that you follow on. And she'll be there for you.